Hello everyone, and welcome to our program discussing the future of the Missouri Public School retirement system. And with us to discuss that issue is the Executive Director of PSRS and the Public Education Employee Retirement System, Steve Yoakum. And Steve, thanks a lot for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation, Brent.
First of all, Steve, why don't you give us some background on both PSRS and PEERS?
Certainly, be happy to do that. PSRS was created in 1946. We're one of the older retirement systems around for educators around the country. The size of the system, we're at about $30 billion in assets. That puts us as one of the largest institutional investors in the country, easily the largest in the state of Missouri, 42nd largest pool of assets in the country, and about the 106th largest pool of assets in the world. We cover the educators for all of the school districts and community college districts, with the exception of the city of St. Louis and the city of Kansas City, who have independent retirement systems. We cover in total about 220,000 active and retired and inactive Missouri educators. So a major financial institution for the state.
Right. And what are the goals of the systems?
The goals are pretty simple. Since 1946 is to help our school districts attract and retain the very best people that we can to teach our kids in the state of Missouri. And I think we've done a very good job of that over the years, of having a good, solid retirement plan, stable retirement plan to, again, help our school districts make sure that they can attract and retain quality educators.
Mm-hmm. And given the environment we're in today, Steve, the public school retirement system is certainly not immune to the economic challenges that all of us are facing right now. So could you give us some background on where the systems stand today?
I sure can. The system's in relatively good condition. Obviously, as you alluded to, the challenges that we've had in the investment markets over the past decade have been a challenge to all institutional investors, and we certainly are not an exception to that. But when you look at our plan last year, we were at about 79% pre-funded, which is an awfully good, strong financial condition, certainly much better than many states. We think that will improve. We've had good investment return the last couple of years. We were up 13% last year, and we're up about 23% so far this year. We're entering a challenging period right now, but we're hopefully that's going to be a short-lived kind of thing. But overall, in relatively good financial condition, but certainly a challenge because of the decline in the markets. We're faced with future changes in the plan in order to make sure that the next generation of educators has as good a retirement plan as the current generation of educators.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the return on investment, Steve. I'm sure that's one of the factors that comes into play as far as the overall health of the systems, but what are the factors that really matter?
Well, the factors that really matter, I think I can best show you. How do you run a plan as complicated as this? There's $30 billion of assets and 200,000 people, and it really comes down to three separate tools that we have available to us. First of all is the benefit structure. The benefit structure we think is a very fair one today. It's designed, as I said, to help our school districts attract and retain some quality people. And it's not subject to change a lot because of the constitutional guarantees on the benefits for public employees, including teachers. The other two levers that we have available to us, first of all, are the investments. The investments are hugely important. They'll generate almost 60% of our total benefit payment to individuals. So what happens in the investment markets is a challenge to us. We have an assumption of an 8% rate of return. And as I said, for the past couple of years, we've been able to exceed that. When we exceed the 8% rate of return, the system gets healthier. When we do not exceed the 8% rate of return, obviously the funding starts to decline, and that brings into play the third lever, which is the contributions. I think when you take a look at the PowerPoint here, it really explains the whole situation. What you see is a liability line in blue that grows every year. As teachers complete a year of service, the promises of the retirement system to them continues to increase. That liability line will grow something in the neighborhood of $1.5 billion to $2 billion per year. For example, we granted about 79,000 years of service on June 30, and that 79,000 years of service increased the promises we have outstanding. The red line on the chart is an interesting line. That's the market value of the assets of the system. And as you'll see, up until the market decline with the tech bubble burst in 2000-2001, the market value of the assets were actually greater than the liabilities. We were over 100% funded. So we saw a blip, a slight decline in the funded status because of the tech bubble bursting in 2000. But you'll also notice those lines starting to narrow again as they start to run back together. And those are years following that where we were exceeding our rates of return and the system was getting healthier. The problem really is where you see the next decline. As you see that big drop in 2008, 2009, it starts to put into comparison the magnitude of the decline of the Great Recession. We're now faced with unfunded liabilities of about $8 to $9 billion. Now, those are not liabilities that have to be put back in the system today. We have 30 years to put them back in. But as I said, because of those three tools that are available to us, if benefits are not cut, which we believe they don't have to be in order to do that, we earn the 8%, then the only variable becomes the contribution rate. And that has been problematic both for the teachers as well as for the school districts going forward. If we go back a couple of years and we look at the contribution rate requirements as that market first began its decline, the actuary had projected the contribution rates would ultimately peak somewhere in the neighborhood of 38 or 39% of payroll. We've had some favorable experience over the last couple of years because of the investment return and other issues that have mitigated that. And we think now that the contribution rates with no changes are going to peak somewhere around 31% of payroll. So a considerable improvement from where we were, but still 1 to 2% higher than where we currently are today. So we're constantly looking for ways that we can, again, improve the funded status and the guarantee that's been given to our educators, and at the same time mitigate those costs for the school districts and the teachers.
Mm-hmm. And Steve, demographics they're playing a big role in this, aren't they? People are retiring a little earlier and living longer, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And as we say in the retirement business, there's three important dates: hire, retire, and expire. We can't do anything about the expiration date. But what's happening, in essence, the built-in part of the cost of our pension plan as compared to many others around the country is exactly the same thing. We're seeing teachers retire at an earlier age. Our average teacher now is just under age 58 as they retire, and they're living longer. Our teachers live longer than the population as a whole now. But one of the interesting byproducts of that hire, retire, expire compendium is that on average, we will pay that average retired teacher more money in retirement than her school district paid her during her working career.
Mm-hmm. Steve, so in order to keep the system healthy for the long term, what are some of the options that might be under consideration?
Well, we've been exploring a number of options, as you might imagine, particularly as the market began its decline in October of '07, looking at a number of different things. As I said, there are only three true options that you can look at: benefit cuts, increasing the earnings, or contribution rate increases. It's very difficult to increase the earnings, particularly with a fund our size, without taking excessive amounts of risk. And we're very comfortable in the model that we have, that we think we can achieve the 8% rate of return over a long period of time. However, if you start reaching for a return, you're putting at risk those returns. And we're not very comfortable in doing that. We're very risk averse, particularly when you're dealing with someone else's pension money. The benefit cuts are problematic. The legal research tells us that pension benefits are guaranteed as a contractual section of our Constitution. They can't be diminished or impaired. So once we promise benefits to retirees, we can't come back and renege on those promises. So we have a limited amount of ability to really make changes in that liability line. We have done some research and continue to do that on a second tier plan, perhaps adding benefit cuts for future hires. We're very reluctant to do that because really what that does is shift the responsibility of the funding of the system really to new hires. And our board historically has believed that it should be more of a shared commitment from the actives, the retireds, and future hires as well, so that as we improve the financial health of the system, it's not on the back of any one group. So we're continuing to do a number of things, researching every option that's available to us out there in terms of future benefit cuts or changes that could be made into benefit promises that would perhaps drop the cost into the future.
So one of the options I understand under consideration, Steve, does have to do with the cost of living adjustments. Tell us about that and why that's an attractive option.
Well, the cost of living adjustment is one of those items that is an important cost driver to the system. It is what we refer to internally as a boulder. It's as you look at the components of the system, what really makes a difference, what moves the needle. Retirement age is one of those on that hire, retire, expire compendium. Obviously, if people retire later, there's less cost to it. But the cost of living adjustment is a big tool. To give you an example, as we did the latest valuation, we looked backwards and saw that the cost of living for the last decade is not nearly as high as it had been for the previous decade. So we were looking at funding it at about 3.25%. As we cut that back to 2.5% or perhaps even 2% going forward, there can be substantial savings. The proposals being talked about right now by the board is making an across-the-board 2% annual increase in the benefits up until the maximum of 5%. The statutes say if the cost of living is over 5%, it will be 5%. But by holding the cost of living down to 2%, we can save about 2.5% of payroll and bring the system into better financial condition, at the same time not raising contribution rates. We can hold the current contribution rate levels, improve the funded status of the system at the same time. And truthfully, this cost of living consideration is really much a shared commitment. About 55% of that cost savings comes from our active members who would not receive as much in cost of living adjustments at retirement, and about 45% from the current retired group.
So the theory, I guess, behind this option, Steve, would be the retirees would have a bird in the hand, essentially, with the 2%, the guaranteed 2%. Is that right?
I think that's exactly right. I think the past 2 years, the cost of living for our plan has been zero. The urban CPI actually declined 2 years ago, and it was a small increase last year, but in the aggregate over the last two, it's been zero. I think when faced with that decision, I would prefer to have a 2% normal increase coming every year and knowing that that's going to occur than to experience the last 2 years of zero increases.
I'm sure there are lots of people out there with questions about the status of the retirement system right now. Steve, what are some of the common questions you're getting now?
I think most people are very concerned about the financial condition of the system. There's an awful lot of press information about pension funds in financial trouble. I'd really like to assure the people our plan is not one of those in financial trouble. As I said, we're at about, last year at about 78% pre-funded. We think that number will go up into the low 80s this year as we roll in another year of improved performance. And as a comparison, that would be similar to a mortgage. If you paid off 80% of your mortgage and you're making your payments, are you bankrupt? Are you a problem? You're really not. Now, there are systems around the country that are in trouble and are having problems. We're not one of those. So we're not worried about making the current benefit payments to our retirees. But what we are is making sure that the challenge for our system is to make sure that next generation of Missouri educators has as solid a plan as the current generation. And that's why we're looking at changes into the future.
For our viewers who might have additional questions, Steve, where can they go?
I would suggest that you call directly into our executive offices. 573-638-1096 will get you into our executive offices. You can talk to me or you can talk to anyone we can get to you. We want to make sure we get your questions answered because we have a strong commitment, as we've done since 1946, to make sure that this system remains a viable tool for our school districts.
All right, Steve Yoakum, thanks very much for joining us on our program, sharing your information and insight on the public school retirement system. We appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And we thank you for joining us on our program as well. Have a good day.